Hello everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep pulling you stories like this. Now, let the shadows take over. Back in 2017, my aunt and uncle bought this sprawling colonial house in upstate New York. It was the kind of place people fantasize about. 3 floors, polished wood banisters, stained glass windows in the upstairs hall. But it was too much house for 2 working parents and a little girl, so they hired a live-in maid. Her name was Maribel. She showed up with nothing but a single duffel bag and this odd, old-fashioned maid's uniform that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. Stiff collar, starched apron, black shoes polished to a shine. My aunt told her she didn't need to wear that she could dress casual, but Maribel just smiled and said, "This house remembers when uniforms mattered." At first, she seemed perfect. She cooked like a chef, scrubbed until the wood gleamed, folded laundry so sharp it looked ironed. But within a week, they noticed something strange. She never slept. Not once. My aunt is a light sleeper, and every night she'd get up for water around 3 in the morning. Each time she'd find Maribel awake, dusting, scrubbing, arranging flowers that weren't even wilting yet. Once she caught her crouched on the kitchen floor, scrubbing invisible spots in the grout while whispering to herself. When asked if she ever rested, Maribel's answer chilled her. "I'll rest when the house rests." It wasn't just my aunt. My uncle stayed up late for work sometimes, and he swore every time he looked toward the living room doorway, Maribel would be there, just standing in the shadows, hands folded in front of her apron, eyes locked on the TV screen. The second he made eye contact, she would slip back into the darkness without a word. Then came Sophie, their 8-year-old daughter. She started talking about the whispering lady. At first, my aunt thought she meant Maribel, but Sophie shook her head. "She's not like Maribel in the daytime. At night, she tells me things." My aunt pressed for details. Sophie's little voice got quiet as she said, "She sits at the end of my bed. She says the house chose us. She says if I listen close, I won't even hear myself scream." That was the breaking point for my aunt. She called me in a panic, asking me to stay the weekend. She said she needed someone else to see it, to tell her she wasn't losing her mind. The first night I stayed, nothing happened. The house was old and drafty, but I didn't see Maribel do anything strange. She was polite, quiet, maybe a little too formal, but not terrifying. The second night changed everything. I was in the guest room across from the attic door. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke to footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps pacing the hallway. I cracked my door, and there she was, Maribel. She was dragging a feather duster along the wall, pressing it like she was feeling for something inside. Her eyes were wide, glassy, vacant. I whispered her name. Her body froze, but her head turned, just the head, slow and stiff, until her eyes locked on mine. In a flat, almost childlike voice, she said, "Go back inside. The house isn't done with you yet." I slammed the door shut, heart hammering. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. But then came the sound, scratching above me. Not rats, not creaks. It was heavier. Something moving on all 4s in the attic. The next morning, Sophie tugged on my sleeve while her mom was out of the room. "She goes up there," she whispered. "She goes in the attic at night. She tells me not to tell Mommy." I checked later when Maribel was outside hanging sheets. The attic door had an old brass lock. My aunt swore she never gave Maribel a key, yet when I tried the knob it rattled, like someone on the other side had just pulled it shut. That night, I woke to something worse. I opened my eyes and Maribel was in my room, standing over me. No feather duster, no tray, nothing in her hands. Just standing there, staring down at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She leaned close enough that I felt her breath against my ear and whispered, "The house says you belong to it now." Then she turned and walked out without a sound, leaving the door wide open behind her. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day I was ready to tell my aunt and uncle everything. That Maribel had come into my room, that she whispered those words about the house, that Sophie was right about her sneaking into the attic. But when I tried to bring it up over breakfast, my aunt cut me off. Her hands were shaking as she stirred her coffee and she muttered, "Don't. Not in front of her." I looked up, and there was Maribel at the kitchen counter, quietly wiping the silverware, humming some tuneless melody under her breath. Sophie sat across from me, pale and tired, dark circles under her eyes. It hit me that maybe she hadn't slept through a full night in months. That night, I decided I couldn't just lie in bed waiting for something to happen. I needed proof. If Maribel was going into the attic, I was going to catch her. So around midnight, I sat in the dark of the guest room, door cracked just enough to see the hallway. My phone was in my hand, camera ready. For hours, nothing. Just the groans of the old house and the faint tick of the hallway clock. Then, at 2:17 exactly, Maribel appeared. She moved without a sound, her stiff skirt brushing the walls as she passed. She stopped at the attic door. I swear I saw her mouth moving, whispering something under her breath. Then the lock clicked. I leaned out just enough to see. She pulled the door open and slipped inside. I followed. The attic stairs groaned under my weight, but she didn't react. She was ahead of me, walking like she knew the path by heart. The attic smelled of mildew and something sour, like old blood that had seeped into wood. My flashlight beam shook in my hand, catching glimpses of furniture under white sheets, dust dancing in the air. Then the beam landed on Maribel. She was kneeling in the center of the attic floor, hands pressed flat to the wood. Her lips moved, whispering in that same language Sophie had described, guttural, rhythmic sounds that didn't belong to anything human. I thought she was alone until my light caught the walls. Scratches. Hundreds of them. Names carved deep into the beams, layer after layer of jagged letters. Some were so old the wood had warped around them. But the most recent name, carved so fresh it looked like the dust hadn't even settled yet, was Sophie. My blood turned to ice. Maribel's head snapped up. Her eyes caught the flashlight, and in that same flat, childlike tone she said, "The house has chosen. She will rest when the house rests." I stumbled back, but she stood and started toward me. Not running, not lunging, just walking, steady and relentless, her shoes clicking against the boards. I turned and bolted down the stairs. By the time I reached the hallway, she wasn't behind me anymore. I thought maybe I'd outrun her until I looked down the stairs to the second floor. She was already there, standing perfectly still at the base of the steps, head tilted back at an unnatural angle, staring at me with those wide, unblinking eyes. I ducked into Sophie's room, slammed the door and locked it. She was awake, sitting up in bed, clutching her blanket. "She told me tonight," Sophie whispered, "that she wants me in the attic forever." My heart pounded as footsteps approached the door, slow, measured. The handle turned, rattled, then stopped. Silence stretched on until I thought maybe she'd gone. I pressed my ear to the door, and that's when I heard it. Her voice, whispering through the wood in that same guttural tongue. But this time I understood one word, clear as day. My name. I yanked Sophie out of bed, opened the window, and we climbed out onto the porch roof. The drop to the ground wasn't far, but Sophie was shaking too hard to move. I half carried her down and we ran barefoot across the lawn to my car. When I looked back at the house, every single upstairs window was lit, and in each one, Maribel stood. Not just once, but in every window, watching. We drove until daylight before stopping. When my aunt and uncle called the next day, they sounded different. Calm. Too calm. They said Maribel had explained everything, that there was nothing to worry about, that Sophie had been having nightmares. But Sophie wasn't with them. I asked where she was, and my aunt said, "She's resting. The house needed her." I never went back, and to this day, no one has seen Sophie again. In the summer of 2019, my buddy Dylan and I decided to drive cross-country from California to Texas. We didn't have much money, so flying wasn't an option, and honestly, we wanted the adventure of the open road. The plan was simple: Dylan's old Honda Civic, a couple duffel bags, and whatever cheap motels we could find along the way. By the third night, somewhere deep in Arizona, exhaustion caught up with us. The desert stretched out for miles in every direction, endless sand and rock with no towns in sight. Just when I thought we'd have to sleep in the car, we spotted a flickering neon sign off the highway. Half the bulbs were dead, but it still glowed just enough to read, "Desert Moon Lodge." The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. A single row of 6 rooms sat in a line, their turquoise paint peeling in long strips. A busted soda machine leaned against the office door, its glass cracked. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a rust-red station wagon with a flat tire, sitting crooked like it hadn't moved in years. We went inside to check in. The manager was a short, balding guy with a stained shirt and a voice like he hadn't spoken in days. He didn't bother asking for ID, just slid a tarnished brass key across the counter and said, "Number 5, don't leave trash outside your door. Estella don't like that." I frowned. "Estella?" His eyes twitched up to mine, red-rimmed and tired. "The maid," he muttered. "She keeps things tidy around here." The way he said it gave me a chill. Dylan laughed as we walked out. "Man, he acts like the cleaning lady's the boogeyman." I chuckled along, but the warning clung to me. Room 5 smelled like ammonia the moment we opened the door. The sheets were tucked in so tight you could have bounced a quarter off them. Not a speck of dust on the dresser. Towels folded into perfect squares. It wasn't just clean, it was obsessive. We were too tired to care. Dylan dropped face first onto the bed without even taking off his shoes. I lay down and tried to drift off, but around 1 in the morning I woke to a sound outside. Squeak, thump, squeak, thump. It was steady, rhythmic, like a cart rolling slowly across concrete. My stomach tightened as it drew closer, then stopped right outside our door. A shadow cut across the strip of light under the frame. Wheels. Shoes. Then, 3 soft knocks. Neither Dylan nor I moved. We just stared at the door in silence. After a long pause, the shadow shifted, and the squeak thump rolled away into the night. The next morning, sunlight baked the parking lot like an oven. On our way to the car, I noticed room 6's door standing open. Curiosity got the better of me, so I slowed down and peered inside. The room looked almost identical to ours. Bed perfectly made. Corners tucked razor sharp. The air smelled sharp with bleach. But right there on the pillow was a single black hair, long and straight, placed dead center like someone had left it on purpose. I didn't say anything until we were back on the road. Dylan just shrugged. "Probably the maid showing off. Dude, you're letting this place get to you." I tried to believe him. But that night, when the car started making a grinding noise and we couldn't push further, the only option was to limp back to the same motel. Desert Moon Lodge looked even worse in the dark. The buzzing sign barely glowed. When we walked into the office, the manager stared at us like we'd just made a mistake. He slid the key across the counter again without a word. As I turned to leave, I swear I heard him mutter under his breath, "Keep it clean this time. Estella's watching close." Back in room 5, Dylan cracked a joke to lighten the mood, but we were both on edge. Around 2 a.m., the sound came again. Squeak, thump, squeak, thump. This time, it didn't stop at our door. It stopped at room 6. We held our breath. Through the thin walls, faint humming drifted into our room. A woman's voice, tuneless and low. Then came a dragging sound. like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Dylan sat up, whispering, "What the hell is she doing in there?" Before I could answer, our doorknob rattled violently. We froze. The sound lasted 3 long seconds, then stopped. Silence swallowed the room. Neither of us slept again that night. In the morning, Dylan went to grab ice from the machine near the office. When he came back, he was pale. "I saw her," he said. "The maid. Estella." "What do you mean?" I asked. "She was standing in room 6, just inside the doorway, half hidden by the curtain, skin pale as paper, uniform gray, long black hair over her face, just staring out the window. When I blinked, she was gone. We grabbed our stuff and checked out as fast as we could. I asked the manager again why room 6's door kept being open, and he snapped at me. Room 6 stays locked. Always. Estella keeps it ready. For them that don't leave. We didn't ask questions. We just got in the car and drove. 2 weeks later, I woke up to a missed call from Dylan's mom. When I called back, she was crying so hard she could barely speak. Dylan hadn't woken up. The police told her his room was spotless. Not just neat, spotless. Like someone had cleaned it top to bottom before leaving. And on his pillow was a single long black hair. That should have been the end of it. But I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. Dylan was 22, healthy, no history of anything, and yet the cops said he died in his sleep. Rooms don't scrub themselves spotless. And the black hair? That wasn't coincidence. The detail gnawed at me every night until finally, a month later, I gave in. I told myself I just wanted closure, but deep down, I knew I was being pulled back. Late one afternoon, I found myself turning off the highway and into that same cracked parking lot of the Desert Moon Lodge. Nothing had changed. The turquoise paint was still peeling in strips. The same rust-red station wagon sat lopsided with its flat tire. The buzzing neon sign sputtered weakly as if fighting to stay alive. The manager was there too. He looked thinner, hollower. When he saw me step inside the office, his face dropped. "You shouldn't be back," he muttered. "I need answers," I told him. "What happened to Dylan?" He rubbed his temples like the weight of my question was crushing him. Finally, he whispered, "Estella don't like when people leave. That boy, he shouldn't have come here." I leaned forward on the counter. "Estella is just a maid, right?" His laugh was dry and broken. "She ain't been a maid in years. I don't even know if she was ever alive the way you think. She was here when the last owner vanished. She was here when the cops came and found nothing. She's always here, keeping it tidy." I demanded to see room 6. His hands shook as he reached beneath the desk, pulling out an old brass key. He pushed it toward me without meeting my eyes. "Don't stay past midnight," he said. The key felt unnaturally cold in my hand. Walking down the row of doors, the desert heat seemed to vanish. My breath fogged faintly in front of me as I reached room 6. The lock turned with a stiff click, and the door creaked open to release a wave of chemical stench. Inside, the room was immaculate. Bed made razor tight, towels folded into perfect stacks. But then I noticed the nightstand. Lined up neatly were items that didn't belong. A cracked wristwatch, a scuffed wallet, a lighter I recognized instantly. Dylan's. My heart pounded. My flashlight beam shook as I scanned the walls. At first they looked freshly painted, but when I angled the light, faint streaks appeared, smears and handprints, pale shadows of stains that had been scrubbed over and over. I backed toward the door, bile rising in my throat. Then I heard it. Squeak, thump, squeak, thump. The cart, rolling closer. The sound stopped right outside. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then slowly turned. The door opened, and Estella entered. She was worse than Dylan had described. Skin paper thin, stretched tight over her bones. Uniform gray and threadbare. Hair long, black, matted, covering most of her face. She pushed her cart in with steady hands. On it sat bottles of bleach, rags stiff with old use, and a neatly coiled length of rope. Her head tilted toward me, eyes cloudy and dead, and in a hollow voice she whispered, "You left a mess." Something in me snapped. I bolted past her, nearly tipping the cart, and sprinted into the night. My feet pounded across the cracked pavement, my chest on fire. I threw myself into the car, slammed the locks down, and peeled out of that lot. In the rearview mirror, Estella stood perfectly still under the buzzing neon sign, her head tilted as she watched me leave. I drove for 2 hours straight before pulling into a rest stop. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I stepped out to breathe, telling myself it was over. Then I smelled it. Bleach. Sharp. Burning. It clung to my clothes, my skin, the air itself. Dread curling in my gut, I opened the trunk. Folded neatly on top of my backpack was a motel towel, crisp white, and resting on it was a single long black hair. I slammed it shut and drove until dawn, but the smell didn't fade. It's been years now. I moved cities, changed apartments, even replaced my car. But some nights, around 2 or 3 in the morning, I wake to a sound outside my bedroom door. Squeak, thump, squeak, thump. And when I check my pillow in the morning, sometimes there's a single black hair lying across it. The Airbnb host swore that nobody else had access to the house. That was one of the reasons we chose it. A quiet neighborhood just outside Chicago, a spacious 4-bedroom home with a backyard fire pit and complete privacy. It was perfect for one last weekend together before real life started pulling us in different directions. There were 4 of us, me, Evan, along with my friends Marissa, Trent, and Jocelyn. We just graduated college in the spring. Trent had already lined up a finance job in Dallas. Jocelyn was moving to Seattle to start grad school, and Marissa had interviews stacked in New York. I was still figuring out my next move. None of that mattered, though. For 3 days, we wanted to pretend we weren't about to split apart. We got in late on Friday. After a long drive and too much gas station food, we collapsed on the couches, ordered pizza, and stayed up talking past midnight. Everything felt normal, comfortable, the way it should have. It was the next morning when things started to shift. I was the first one awake. I padded down the stairs half asleep, phone in hand, and nearly dropped it when I saw a woman standing in the kitchen. She wore a plain gray cleaning uniform, her dark hair pinned back in a tight bun. She was wiping down the counters in slow, careful circles. She turned when she noticed me, offered a polite but faintly stiff smile, and said, "Good morning. I'm just here to tidy up." I froze. We hadn't asked for a cleaning service. The host hadn't mentioned it in any of her messages. Before I could even respond, Marissa came downstairs behind me. She stopped short when she saw the woman, then glanced at me like, "Did you know about this?" I shook my head. The woman didn't wait for questions. She moved around us, calm and deliberate, sliding into the living room. We followed her with our eyes as she adjusted the throw pillows, folded the blanket Jocelyn had left in a heap, and dusted the TV stand. She didn't ask where supplies were. She didn't ask if it was okay. She simply acted as though this was her house, and we were the intruders. By the time Trent and Jocelyn came downstairs, the maid was vacuuming, dragging neat parallel lines into the carpet. She didn't acknowledge them either, just kept humming softly under her breath. We tried to brush it off. Maybe the host had scheduled her to drop by, we thought. It was weird, but we told ourselves it wasn't worth making a scene. Still, the unease stayed with me, and it only got worse later in the day. When I went upstairs to grab my charger, I noticed my suitcase wasn't where I had left it. Not only had it been moved, but everything inside had been refolded. My shirts were stacked on the dresser in precise piles, my jeans folded edge to edge, my toothbrush placed neatly across a folded hand towel, like I'd checked into a hotel. I thought maybe it was a prank, but when I asked the others, every one of them had their own story. Marissa's makeup had been unzipped and reorganized by shade. Trent's crumpled clothes were suddenly pressed and folded. Jocelyn's notebook, full of class notes and scribbles, had been opened and neatly bookmarked with a clean white ribbon none of us had seen before. That night when we came back from dinner, the entire house was immaculate. Our shoes had been lined in perfect order by the front door. The trash cans were emptied. The dishes were washed and stacked. The entire place smelled of bleach. And the maid was gone. We sat around the fire pit trying to laugh it off. The night was crisp, the flames throwing sparks into the dark. But Marissa broke the silence. She knew my name. She whispered. We all turned toward her. When I came downstairs this morning before you guys were up, she said, "Good morning, Marissa." The fire popped loudly. None of us laughed after that. Later, when I went to bed, I locked my door. I told myself I was being paranoid, but sometime after midnight I woke to a faint sound. Humming, low, tuneless, coming from inside my room. Then the rasp of a zipper. My suitcase. I sat up, my chest tight, and in the dim orange glow from the streetlight outside I saw her. The maid. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding one of my shirts against her face, eyes closed as she hummed softly. When she realized I was awake, she didn't flinch. She opened her eyes slowly, smiled faintly, and whispered, "I'll keep you clean too." I couldn't breathe. The way she sat there, humming with my shirt pressed against her face, felt so wrong I thought my chest might split open. When she finally whispered those words, "I'll keep you clean too," I nearly leapt from the bed. But before I could move, she carefully folded the shirt, placed it back into my suitcase, zipped it shut with perfect precision, and stood. She just stood there, tilting her head at me, eyes glassy in the faint light like she was deciding if I was worth scrubbing out. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of my room, closing the door so softly it didn't even click. I sat frozen until the sun came up. At breakfast, I told the others everything. Jocelyn's spoon slipped into her bowl of cereal. "She was in my room too," she whispered. I woke up and she was sitting on my bed mirror, brushing my hair with her fingers. Marissa's face drained of color. Trent slammed his coffee mug onto the table and grabbed his phone. "That's it. I'm calling the host." We all crowded around while he dialed. When the host answered, he explained everything. The maid, how she had been cleaning, how she'd been inside our rooms. There was a long silence. Then the host said something that made my stomach drop. "I don't have a maid service. Nobody should be in the house but you." We stared at each other in shock. Trent stammered, "But she's been here all weekend." The host's voice cracked with panic. "Get out. Get out right now." Before Trent could respond, we heard it. 3 slow knocks on the living room wall. Not the door. The wall. The 4 of us froze. A faint humming began to drift down the hallway, closer with every note. Trent grabbed a fireplace poker, his knuckles white, and we crept toward the living room. The air smelled of bleach so strong it burned my throat. The front door was ajar, swinging gently. "She's gone," Marissa whispered, though her voice shook. We decided to pack and leave immediately. But as we were shoving things into our bags, Jocelyn screamed from upstairs. We bolted to the bathroom and found her huddled in the corner, dripping wet, a towel clutched around her. The mirror above the sink was spotless, gleaming, except for one thing. Words written across the fog in looping perfect letters. "You belong to me." We didn't waste another second. We grabbed what we could, ran down the stairs and threw our bags into the car. I swear I saw her in the upstairs window as we pulled away. The maid, head tilted, smiling faintly, her hand pressed against the glass like she was waving goodbye. We drove 3 hours straight before stopping for gas. Nobody said a word. The silence in the car felt heavier than the night itself. At the station, Marissa opened her bag to grab a sweater. She froze. Every piece of clothing inside was folded tighter than any of us could ever manage. On top of the stack lay a single white slip of paper. In that same looping handwriting, it said, "I'll keep you clean too." I was 19 the summer I took the night orderly job at Maplewood Rest, a small nursing home tucked on the edge of a little town in Ohio. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid, and my mom said it would build character. Most of the night was routine, checking vitals, answering call lights, walking the halls when things got too quiet. There was always one person, though, who unsettled me. Elva, the overnight maid. She didn't look like the others on staff. While the nurses wore scrubs and sneakers, Elva wore a faded navy uniform buttoned to the throat, with spotless white gloves and shoes that tapped softly on the linoleum. Her gray hair was coiled into a bun so tight it looked painful. She never raised her voice, never broke a sweat. But the way she cleaned, it was like a ritual. She moved room to room with her rolling cart, polishing, scrubbing, bleaching, until everything gleamed. She would spend 20 minutes on a single doorknob, buffing it with slow circles until you could see your face in it. The residents whispered about her. "She cleans too much." One old man muttered to me once, "She'll rub you right out of this world if you're not careful." I laughed it off, but the way his eyes trembled made me uneasy. The first time I noticed something wasn't right was a Wednesday night in July. Elva was in room 12, where Mrs. Hadley, a frail woman with dementia, stayed. I walked by with my clipboard and heard the sound of scrubbing, wet, harsh strokes over and over again. "Everything okay in there?" I asked through the door. The scrubbing stopped. Elva's voice came soft but steady. "Almost finished. Just a stain that doesn't want to come out." When she opened the door, the smell of bleach rolled out so strong my eyes watered. The bed was made tight. The floor gleamed, but Mrs. Hadley wasn't in sight. "Where's Mrs. Hadley?" I asked. Elva smiled faintly. She was very dirty. Took longer than I expected. She's resting now. The bed was perfectly smooth, not a wrinkle in the sheets. For a moment I thought she meant Mrs. Hadley had been bathed and moved, but the bathroom was dark and empty. When I checked the chart the next morning, Mrs. Hadley had been marked as deceased. They said she passed quietly in her sleep, but her bed had been too perfect, too untouched, like nobody had lain there at all. After that I started noticing the pattern. Every week another resident gone, and always after Elva's shift. Each time their rooms would gleam with that sharp chemical smell, their belongings neatly packed away, their beds made tight enough to bounce a quarter. I told one of the nurses, but she just shook her head. "Honey, they're old. This is what happens. Don't go scaring yourself." But I couldn't shake it, because each time I heard the same thing before it happened. That relentless sound of scrubbing echoing down the hallway. One night around 3 a.m., I was making rounds when I heard it again. The steady rhythm of cloth on skin, not furniture. I turned the corner quietly and froze. Elva was in Mr. Carson's room. He was sitting on the edge of the bed in his gown, his thin arms trembling, while she stood over him with a rag. She was scrubbing at his forearm, hard, like she was trying to erase a mark only she could see. Mr. Carson whimpered, "It hurts." But Elva kept working, whispering, "Shh, nothing stays dirty on my shift." I stepped into the doorway. "Elva, stop." She turned to me slowly, her gloved hand tightening on Mr. Carson's arm. Her face was pale, expression blank, but her eyes seemed to shine with something sharp and hollow. "Back to your rounds," she said calmly. "He'll be spotless soon." Mr. Carson looked at me, tears streaking his cheeks, and whispered, "Please." My throat locked. I wanted to drag her away from him, but I couldn't move. There was something about the way she looked at me, like she had already measured me up, already knew what it would take to scrub me out. When I came back later, Mr. Carson's bed was perfectly made. His name tag had been removed from the door. They said he passed in his sleep, but I knew better. After Mr. Carson, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The deaths were too neat, too precise. Every single one happened on Elva's shift, and every single time the room looked like it had been staged, gleaming, spotless, without the smallest sign of struggle or life. I started keeping notes on a clipboard I carried in my pocket. Dates, times, names, little details the nurses overlooked. Mrs. Hadley, Mr. Carson, Mrs. Lee, all gone peacefully, all after 3 in the morning, all with the same smell of bleach so strong it clung to my clothes after walking past. The worst part wasn't the rooms. It was the silence that followed. The residents were terrified of her, though none of them said it out loud. Whenever Elva pushed her cart down the hall, wheels squeaking against the linoleum, conversation stopped. Eyes dropped to the floor. I swear I once saw an old woman pretending to be asleep, just so Elva wouldn't look at her. One night, I tried to shadow her. I thought if I stayed close, I'd see what she was really doing. But Elva moved with an eerie awareness. Every time I lingered near a doorway, she'd pause and glance back, her face expressionless, as if to say, "I know you're watching." Around 2 a.m., she slipped into room 7, Mr. Whitaker's room. He was one of the stronger residents, a retired steelworker with a booming laugh that still echoed down the halls. I pressed my ear to the door. At first, nothing. Then I heard it. That terrible sound. The rag dragging over skin, slow and merciless. I pushed the door open a crack and saw her standing over him, pressing the cloth into his chest, rubbing hard enough that his skin reddened. He groaned, weak but pained, as she whispered, "Filth must come out. All of it." I burst in this time. "Stop it." Elva didn't flinch. She turned slowly, her eyes locking on mine. Calm. Cold. She placed the rag back into her bucket and said in that steady voice, "Mr. Whitaker is finished. You'll take him off the chart." I looked at him, his chest barely rising, his eyes fluttering shut. I rushed to his side, but by the time I touched him, he was gone. The monitors still beeped but faint, meaningless. When I looked back at her, she was already smoothing the sheets, tucking the corner so tight it was like he had never been there. That was the night I finally understood. Elva wasn't just cleaning. She was erasing. I went to the head nurse the next morning, begged her to listen. She sighed, rubbed her temples, and said I was overtired, imagining things. "These people are old, Liam. They die. Don't turn it into some ghost story." But it wasn't age. It wasn't chance. Elva was scrubbing them out one by one, and she had noticed me noticing. The next week I started finding things. My shoes lined up perfectly in my locker when I hadn't touched them. My uniform folded tighter than I'd ever done. Once I opened my bag and found a note written in thin, looping handwriting. "You're not clean. Not yet." That night, as I walked the halls, I heard the wheels of her cart behind me. Squeak, roll, squeak. No matter how many turns I made, the sound followed. When I spun around, the hallway was empty, but the scent of bleach was so sharp it burned my throat. I knew then I was next. At 3 a.m., I went to the supply closet to hide. I shut the door, heart pounding, and tried to steady my breathing. Then I heard it. Scrubbing. Right outside the door. I pressed my eye to the crack and saw her gloves moving back and forth, polishing the handle. Polishing it harder and harder, whispering, "Nothing stays dirty on my shift." I held my breath, praying she wouldn't open the door. After what felt like hours, the scrubbing stopped. When I finally stepped out, the metal handle gleamed so bright it looked new. 2 days later, I quit, walked out, and never went back. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake to the sound of cloth on skin, a steady, merciless rhythm, my sheets tucked tighter than I left them, my shoes lined at the foot of the bed, and on my nightstand, the faintest smell of bleach. When I took the night security job at the Armitage, a high-rise assisted living building in Cincinnati, I thought it would be easy money. Most residents were elderly, the kind of folks who went to bed by 9. My shift was 11 to 7. All I had to do was walk the halls, check doors, and sign logs. For the first 2 weeks, it was exactly that, boring. I'd drink coffee, pace the halls, nod politely at the occasional insomniac resident wandering around. But the third week, I noticed her. She wore a black maid's dress, long skirt brushing the floor with a crisp white apron. Her hair was pulled back under a lace cap. The uniform looked old-fashioned, like something out of a photograph. She pushed a small cart that rattled with cleaning supplies, though I never saw her use them. I asked the supervisor about her. "You mean Janine?" he said. "We don't have anyone by that name." That was the first time my stomach turned. The next night I saw her again, standing perfectly still in the hallway, polishing the face of a grandfather clock that had been in the lobby for years. She didn't look up when I passed. The cloth in her hand moved in small circles, again and again until the brass gleamed. I glanced at my watch. It was 1:47 a.m., but when I looked again after walking past her, it read 12:04. I figured I was tired, maybe hit the button by accident. But when I looked back, the entire lobby clock had rewound, its hands ticking backward before settling on midnight. I told myself I imagined it. 2 nights later, a resident flagged me down. "Son," Mr. Ellison said, voice trembling, "why'd you let her in my room last night?" "Who?" I asked. "The maid. She dusted my pictures. Smelled like lavender. When I woke up, my watch was gone. And when I checked the calendar, it was Tuesday again." I tried to laugh it off, but he gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "She took my time. You hear me? She took it." That same week, we lost 2 residents, both marked as natural deaths, both on nights I saw her cart rattling down the halls. I started paying attention. Whenever she appeared, clocks seemed wrong. My phone would reset to earlier hours. My patrol log would lose whole entries, like I hadn't written them yet. I'd find residents staring at walls, confused, swearing they'd already lived through the day. The scariest was Marjorie, a sharp-witted 82-year-old who played cards with me sometimes. She looked at me one morning and whispered, "I think I'm missing weeks," like she dusted them away while I was sleeping. That night, I made up my mind to follow the maid. I trailed her cart down the east wing. She stopped at room 419, belonging to a quiet man named Harold. She slipped inside without knocking. I waited 30 seconds, then eased the door open. What I saw froze me in place. Harold was sitting in bed, staring at the wall, his lips moving like he was counting. The maid stood over his dresser, carefully winding back the clock on his nightstand. But it wasn't just the clock. Harold's body twitched in time with the hands. With every tick backward, his skin sagged a little more, his hair thinned, his voice grew weaker. When she finished, she turned and looked straight at me. Her eyes were pale gray, cold and endless like the face of a clock with no hands. She smiled faintly. "You shouldn't be awake for this." Her words echoed in my head. "You shouldn't be awake for this." I should have run, should have called someone, but my legs wouldn't move. She stepped away from Harold's dresser, the clock gleaming in her gloved hands, and for just a moment, I swore the brass surface reflected not my face but Harold's, 20 years younger, eyes wide with confusion. Then it flickered, and he slumped back against the pillows. By morning, he was gone. I told the head nurse everything, the maid, the clocks, how Harold withered as she rewound the time. She frowned, jotted something down, and told me to get some rest. I knew from the way she looked at me that she didn't believe a word, but I also knew I wasn't imagining it. The next few nights I avoided her. If I heard the cart squeak or the soft brush of cloth against glass, I turned the other way. Still, I couldn't escape her presence. My watch jumped backward randomly. The clock in the break room would reset to midnight no matter how many times I fixed it. Worst of all, my patrol logs began eating themselves. Entries I knew I'd written hours earlier were suddenly blank, as if they'd been erased. Then came the night she came for me. It was around 3 a.m. I'd just finished walking the east wing when I returned to the lobby and froze. Every clock in the building, the grandfather clock, the ones on the walls, even my phone, all read the exact same time, 2:59. The second hands ticked once, then stopped. The air felt heavy, pressing down like a storm about to break. She appeared at the end of the hallway, her cart rolling slowly, softly, like wheels on carpet, though the floor was linoleum. She didn't look at me. She just polished the glass face of a clock she carried in her hands. With each circle of her cloth, I felt something inside me, slipping. My vision blurred. My knees buckled. For a second, I couldn't remember how old I was. 20? 25? Or was I still 12, sitting in my childhood room listening to the tick of the wall clock? Memories flickered like a film reel out of order. I staggered toward her. "Stop, whatever you're doing." She raised her head slowly, eyes pale gray and endless. "You've been awake too long, Liam. Dust settles. Time gathers. It's my duty to clean it." Her hand reached toward me. The glove brushed my sleeve, and in that instant, I felt it. Years peeling away like dust shaken from old curtains. My joints ached, my back bent, my breath rattled. I looked down at my hands and saw them spotted, wrinkled, trembling. Panic snapped me out of it. I shoved her back, the clock slipping from her grip and crashing to the floor. The glass shattered, and with it came a rush of air so cold it burned. The lights flickered. For just a second, every clock in the building spun wildly, hands whipping backward so fast they blurred. I bolted for the exit. The doors didn't budge. Behind me, I heard the squeak of her cartwheels, slow and steady. "You can't leave dirty," she whispered. "I haven't finished you yet." I sprinted down the hall, heart pounding, and ducked into the stairwell. My chest felt like it was collapsing, my breath shallow and cracked. By the time I reached the ground floor, I wasn't sure if I was 19 anymore. I might have been 30. Or 40. I never went back. I left Cincinnati within a week, told everyone I just couldn't handle the job. But even now, miles away, I hear it some nights. The soft squeak of cartwheels outside my apartment door. The faint scrape of cloth against glass. And when I check the clock on my nightstand, sometimes it doesn't match the one on my phone. Sometimes it doesn't match at all. When my uncle passed, I needed money for school, so I took a part-time job at Whitlock & Sons Funeral Home in rural Kentucky. People thought it was a grim choice, but the truth is, funerals always fascinated me. The quiet, the ritual, the strange respect for the dead. It felt heavier than working retail or fast food. The hours weren't bad either. I mostly worked evenings, answering phones, sweeping the chapel, and setting up for viewings. The funeral home itself was unsettling in ways I didn't expect. It was an old white farmhouse converted into a business sometime in the 1950s. The wood floors groaned under every step. The air always carried a faint chemical tang, like formaldehyde had seeped into the walls over decades. The chapel was lined with heavy red curtains that swallowed sound, making whispers echo strangely. Every night I walked the halls, I felt watched. Not by the dead in their caskets, but by the house itself. And then there was Corinne. I don't know if maid is the right word for her, but that's what she looked like. She wore a pressed black dress with a white apron that always looked freshly starched, even in the dead of night. Her hair was steel gray, twisted into a bun so tight it pulled at her skin. She spoke little, moved slowly, and cleaned constantly. She dusted the pews in the chapel, polished doorknobs, wiped down caskets, and swept the floors, all in silence except for the faint scrape of her cloth. When I asked Mr. Whitlock once how long she'd worked there, he gave a flat answer. Corinne came with the building. He didn't elaborate, and the look on his face told me not to push. At first I didn't think much of her. Funeral homes need to be spotless. Families notice every detail. But the longer I worked there, the stranger she seemed. One night, I passed the chapel after midnight and stopped cold. Corinne was in there, standing beside a closed casket as if presiding over a service. She had adjusted the flowers around it, laid hymn books neatly across the first row of pews, and was whispering softly at the podium. I couldn't make out the words, but her voice carried the rhythm of a prayer. The thing was, the chapel was empty. No family, no body, no scheduled viewing. When I asked her later what she was doing, she only said, "Getting things ready." A week later, I walked into the embalming room after she'd been cleaning. On the table lay a pressed black suit, polished shoes, and a folded tie. For a moment, I thought it was clothing meant for an upcoming service. But then I recognized the shirt. It was mine. The exact brand and size I had in my locker upstairs. My skin prickled all over. I asked Mr. Whitlock if Corinne had access to the staff lockers. His face paled, then tightened. "She shouldn't," he muttered. Then, more firmly, "Best not to bother her about it." After that, I began noticing smaller things. My shoes, left muddy after walking across the gravel lot, would be polished the next morning. My work shirt, wrinkled from being stuffed into my bag, appeared ironed and folded across my chair. Once I opened my locker and found my name written on a tag, tucked inside a clear slip the way the deceased were labeled for services. I laughed it off nervously to myself, but a stone was forming in my gut. One night I dozed off in the break room. When I woke, I wasn't lying the way I had fallen asleep. My hands were folded neatly across my chest, my legs stretched straight as though arranged. My shoes had been placed side by side at the foot of the couch. My skin felt tight, almost waxy. When I looked in the mirror above the sink, I saw a faint chalkiness to my lips, as though makeup had been brushed there, then wiped away. I staggered into the hall and found Corinne polishing the door frame outside the preparation room. Her expression was flat, but her eyes flicked toward me like she'd been waiting. "It's better if you're ready," she said softly. "Death comes cleaner that way." Her words chilled me worse than the embalming room ever had. From then on, I kept my distance. Still, I noticed she wasn't only focused on staff. I saw townsfolk who came to the funeral home alive, dropping off clothes, signing papers, arranging flowers, leave looking pale and shaken. They couldn't explain why, only muttered that the place got under their skin. Twice I caught Corinne in the preparation room with no body on the table. Instead, a living visitor sat in the chair, dazed, eyes half closed, while Corinne combed their hair or folded their hands in their lap, whispering, "Almost ready. Almost." I told myself I'd quit, but every time I tried, something pulled me back. Maybe it was money, maybe fear of admitting what I'd seen. Then came the night I knew she had chosen me. I stepped into the staff quarters after a late service and found my bed turned down, sheets folded with sharp corners like hospital linen. A pressed black suit lay draped across the chair. On the pillow, a pair of spotless white gloves. Beside them was a card, written in looping script. "Viewing. Liam Whitfield. Scheduled soon." I stared at the card on my pillow for what felt like hours. My throat was so tight I couldn't swallow. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. The handwriting was precise, elegant, deliberate. Corinne had written it. The next morning, I tried to tell Mr. Whitlock. I showed him the card, but he only frowned and rubbed his temples like I was wasting his time. "You've been working too many late nights," he said. "Grief plays tricks on people. Take a day off." But when I checked my bed again after our conversation, the card was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat upright on the couch in the staff quarters, fully dressed, a flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other. Around 2 a.m, I heard the soft, steady shuffle of shoes on the stairs. Corinne. I shut off the flashlight and pretended to sleep, peering through half-closed eyes. She entered silently, carrying a silver tray with brushes and powders laid neatly across it. She set the tray on the chair, adjusted her apron and leaned over me. Her gloved fingers brushed my cheek. The powder was cold, chalky. She dabbed it across my skin with meticulous strokes, tilting her head as though testing how the light caught. I forced myself not to move. She whispered as she worked. Peaceful. So peaceful. You'll look just right. Her hand slipped lower, folding mine across my chest. I felt her tuck a small white flower into the crook of my fingers. The scent of lilies rose sharp and cloying. Then she paused, leaning down close to my ear. Don't fight me, Liam. You'll be remembered clean. I bolted upright, knocking the tray from the chair. Brushes and powders scattered across the floor. For the first time, I saw her expression crack. Her lips tightened, her eyes flared pale and furious. You're not ready, she hissed. I ran. The hallways twisted in darkness, but the smell of lilies followed me. Every door I passed seemed too perfectly aligned, every chair polished, every picture frame adjusted, as though she had already been there preparing them. Preparing me. I burst into the chapel, gasping, and froze. The casket at the front of the room was open. Inside lay a figure in a pressed black suit, hands folded neatly, lips painted pale. The face was mine. My own body, dressed and still. I stumbled back, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give out. Behind me, the chapel doors creaked. Corinne's voice floated through the dark. Early viewing, then. You'll rest better this way. I slammed the side exit open and tore out into the night. Gravel cut through my shoes as I sprinted across the lot, not daring to look back. The whole way home, I swore I saw headlights in the distance, faint and steady, like a hearse keeping pace with me. I quit the next morning, packed my things and never set foot in Whitlock & Sons again. But quitting didn't matter, because even now, in the small apartment I rent 3 counties over, I wake to find my bed tucked tight, my shoes polished, my hands folded neatly over my chest. And sometimes on my nightstand, a white glove rests beside a fresh lily. And last week, God help me, there was another card. Viewing. Liam Whitfield. Tonight. The old Dry Creek Middle School had been closed since 2005, when a fire gutted the cafeteria, and smoke damage ruined half the building. Nobody rebuilt it. The district just started buzzing kids to the next county, and the place was left to rot. By the time I was 23, the windows were boarded, the gym roof sagged like a broken spine, and weeds split the blacktop where we used to play dodgeball. That summer, a demolition company out of Charleston won the bid to tear it down. My uncle knew the foreman and slipped me a job, night security. All I had to do was keep kids from sneaking in and scrap thieves from hauling out copper before the machines rolled in. The first night I walked those halls, my chest tightened with a wave of déjà vu. The walls still smelled faintly of char and dust, like a chalkboard wiped too many times. The exit signs buzzed with weak red light. Rows of lockers stood like rusted teeth, their paint peeling, their locks broken. It was like stepping into a memory I didn't want to remember. I carried a flashlight and tried to look tough, but every door I passed whispered and clicked in the night breeze. The classrooms felt too familiar. Rows of empty desks, sun-faded posters of multiplication tables, blackboards scarred with chalk. I swear I could hear echoes of sneakers squeaking on tile, the murmur of kids reciting the pledge. That was when I saw her. Down the corridor near the gym, a woman pushed a wooden cart, not a janitor with a mop and bucket. This was older, heavier, like something wheeled straight out of another decade. She wore a long black maid's dress, apron starched white, hair pulled into a knot that glinted silver under the exit sign. She moved slowly, humming to herself in a tune I didn't recognize. "Hey," I called. My voice cracked in the silence. "You're not supposed to be in here." She didn't turn. She stopped at a row of lockers, pulled out a rag, and began scrubbing. As my flashlight beam landed on the metal, my stomach flipped. She was wiping my old locker, number 1 of 18, and carved into the paint, My name, Ethan W. I remembered using a pocket knife one day in 7th grade, laughing with my buddy Shane as we etched our names side by side. But as her rag passed over it, the letters melted away, the grooves flattened, the scratches smoothed out, until there was nothing but rusted paint. I froze. What the hell? She paused, tilting her head. Slowly she looked at me. Her eyes were pale gray, almost glassy, like the cloudy face of a clock. Her lips parted and she whispered, "Clean." Then she pushed the cart and moved on, humming again. I backed away and told myself I was tired, that maybe the mark was never really there. But I knew it had been. I'd touched it with my own hands 100 times. The next morning, I texted Shane, "Dude, you remember carving our names into 118? You still got that pocket knife?" The message bounced back. Number not in service. I tried Facebook. His profile was gone. I called another friend, Jared, who used to hang with both of us. "Shane?" Jared said. "Who's Shane?" My skin went cold. Jared wasn't messing with me. He sounded confused, irritated even, like I'd brought up a stranger. That night I came back to the school with a pit in my stomach. I told myself I was imagining things, that people move away, delete accounts, change numbers. But deep down I knew better. And when I walked into the art room, my worst fear came true. The walls were still covered with kids' doodles. Dragons, superheroes, hearts with names inside. They'd been there since the school closed. Some I even remembered watching people draw. But she was there too, rag in hand, scrubbing slowly. I watched as a marker drawing of a dog dissolved under her cloth. The ink didn't smear. It just vanished. I knew the kid who drew it. Tommy Reynolds. He'd been in my homeroom, always bragging about his dog Scout. I pulled out my phone and searched his name. Nothing. Not on Facebook, not in yearbooks scanned online. I dug through old photos on my drive, pictures from 8th grade camp. In one group shot, Tommy had been standing right next to me. But now the space was empty. Just trees and shadows. She was erasing people. Every mark she scrubbed was a thread pulled from memory. And when the mark disappeared, the person unraveled with it. By the third night, it wasn't just old classmates. I couldn't remember my 7th grade math teacher's name, even though I could still hear her voice scolding me. A kid named Kyle, who once threw a football at my face, slipped from my head entirely. I remembered the bruise, but not the boy who caused it. And every time I walked the halls I heard her. The scrape of her rag, the squeak of her cartwheels, the hum of that tune carrying through the burned-out cafeteria and echoing down stairwells. On the 4th night, I forced myself into the old science lab. The counters were still lined with empty beakers. A terrarium in the corner held nothing but bones and dirt. On the blackboard, faint chalk formulas lingered from years ago. And there she was, wiping the board in neat circles. I shouted at her to stop. She didn't even flinch. Letters vanished under her cloth, numbers dissolved, and with them, a memory snapped in my head. An entire science fair project gone. The partner I worked with, her laugh, her face, I couldn't recall them no matter how hard I tried. It was like someone had cut her out of my mind with scissors. That night I went home shaking. I scoured through old photos, yearbooks, journals. Whole pages were empty. Faces missing from pictures, stories without names. The people I grew up with were dissolving, one by one, leaving me with blanks where memories should have been. By the 5th night I'd had enough. I was going to prove it. I stormed into the burned wing, through the charred cafeteria, past the collapsed stairwell. My flashlight beam shook as I scanned the walls. Then I saw it. My name, carved into the wood of a desk. Jagged, messy, the way a bored kid leaves his mark to prove he was there. And down the hallway I heard her cart squeak closer. The carved letters stared up at me from the scarred desk. Ethan W. My name, etched in the wood like proof I'd once been alive. I ran my fingers over the grooves, rough and shallow, but real. For a second I felt a wave of relief. Something of me still existed here. Then I heard the squeak of wheels. Down the hallway, the maid's cart rolled closer, the faint scrape of cloth against wood following it. She was humming again, low, tuneless, like the rattle of an old radiator. The sound drew nearer, steady and unhurried, like she already knew there was no escape. I pressed my palm flat against my name as if I could shield it. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat echoing in the hollow school like a drum. When she turned the corner, her pale eyes found me instantly. She tilted her head, gaze settling not on me but on the desk beneath my hand. Her lips parted in that same whisper, "Dirty." "No," I snapped, my voice shaking. "You're not touching this. You hear me? You're not touching it." She kept moving, cart rattling, rag poised in her gloved hand. I backed against the desk, gripping the edge until my knuckles burned white. "Stay back," I said. "If you wipe this away, I'll disappear, won't I? That's what you've been doing, erasing people. My friends, my teachers, everyone who left their mark here. You made them vanish." For the first time, her humming stopped. She stood perfectly still. Then, in a voice dry as dust, she said, "Clean halls, clean minds. That's the way it should be." Her words sent a shiver straight down my spine. I yanked out my phone, desperate, scrolling through contacts. Half the names were gone. Just blank spaces with no numbers. Even pictures were disappearing before my eyes, faces fading into backgrounds. My mom's face remained, my dad's too, but my childhood was dissolving. I looked back at the desk. My name was still there. Barely. The grooves seemed shallower, like time itself was sanding them away. I made a choice. I grabbed the desk with both arms and dragged it, scraping it across the tile toward the exit. The noise echoed like thunder in the hollow school. Dust poured off the wood, filling my lungs, but I didn't care. If I could just get it out, maybe she couldn't reach it. Behind me, the cart's wheels screeched. The maid moved faster now, her shoes clicking sharp against the floor. I didn't dare look back. I burst through the double doors into the cafeteria. The ceiling sagged, char stains spider-webbed across the walls. My breath came ragged, but I kept dragging the desk, muscles screaming, splinters cutting into my palms. The maid's humming rose behind me louder, shriller, like she was angry now. The temperature dropped, my breath fogging in the humid night air. I reached the emergency exit, slammed my shoulder into the bar and shoved the desk out onto the cracked asphalt. I stumbled after it, falling to my knees, chest heaving. For a moment, silence. Then the door creaked. She stood in the frame, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, rag clenched in her fist. She didn't step outside. She didn't need to. Her voice carried across the lot, whispering in 100 echoes. Everything must be clean. The desk shuddered beneath my hands. My name, Ethan W., blurred before my eyes, the grooves filling smooth. "No!" I screamed. I clawed at the wood, trying to dig the letters deeper with my nails. Splinters tore into my fingers. Blood smeared across the surface, but the letters dissolved faster. The W vanished first, then the N, then the E. I felt it in my head, like pieces of me were breaking off, slipping away. My middle school crush gone. The sound of my old bike's chain gone. The smell of my grandmother's kitchen gone. My voice cracked as I shouted, trying to remember anything, everything. But the harder I tried, the more it slipped. The last letter disappeared. The wood was blank. I gasped, and for a moment, nothing existed. Then I woke up in my apartment. I sat upright, drenched in sweat, lungs on fire. My hands were clean, no splinters, no blood. The clock said 3:12 a.m. For a second, I convinced myself it was a nightmare. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized something was wrong. There were gaps in my phone contacts. My high school yearbooks on the shelf, whole pages were blank. My mom's scrapbook, the one with pictures of me at soccer practice, now showed only empty fields. And when I checked my driver's license in the mirror, my name wasn't there. Just a blank strip where the letters should be. I dropped the card, stomach twisting. My reflection stared back, pale, uncertain, fading at the edges like smoke. And then, faint but clear, from somewhere deep inside the walls of my apartment, I heard the squeak of cartwheels. Closer, closer, and a whisper that slid through my bones. Not finished. Back when I was 19, my cousin Darius dragged me into urban exploration. He had this obsession with crumbling buildings, old malls, dead factories, forgotten hospitals. He'd film everything, upload it to YouTube, call it preserving history. Really, it was just trespassing. That's how we ended up at Briarhurst State Hospital outside Dayton, Ohio. It had been a psychiatric facility for nearly 100 years, then shuttered in the early 90s after too many lawsuits. For decades, it sat abandoned, a red brick labyrinth with its windows shattered, its hallways gutted by mold and peeling paint. Everyone in town called it the Scrub House because of an urban legend that a maid still wandered its halls at night, cleaning patients who weren't dirty. Darius thought it was hilarious. "Imagine the clickbait," he said, grinning as we climbed through a busted window. "Scrub House Ghost Maid, 1 million views easy." The first thing that hit me inside wasn't the smell of mildew. It was the sterile, chemical sting of disinfectant. Faint, but sharp enough to burn my nostrils. The air felt scrubbed. We made our way through a patient wing, past rows of rusted bed frames and wheelchairs with cracked leather seats. Our flashlights caught words carved into the walls. "Keep her away. Clean is death, not dirt, skin." I laughed nervously, but Darius was thrilled. "Perfect atmosphere." He set up his tripod, panning the hall. That's when we heard it. A soft swish. The rhythmic squeak of wheels. We froze, lights cutting through the gloom. At the far end of the corridor, a figure pushed a metal cart. Slowly, steadily. A rag dangled from one gloved hand, her uniform stark black and white against the crumbling plaster. Her hair was knotted in a tight bun, face shadowed except for the glint of pale, watchful eyes. I whispered, "Darius, you seeing this?" He grinned like an idiot. "Hell yeah, we got her." But I couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe right. She stopped beside one of the bed frames, dipped the rag into a basin, and began scrubbing the rusted metal. The squeak of cloth on steel echoed too loud, like the whole building was amplifying the sound. Darius crept closer with his camera. I hissed at him to stop, but he didn't listen. When the maid finished, she turned her head toward us, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes locked on me, not on the camera, not on Darius, but directly on me. Her lips parted in a whisper I could barely hear. "Unclean." Darius laughed nervously. "Lady, this is gold. Keep it up." But the maid dropped the rag, dipped her hands into the basin, and wrung them out. The water sloshed dark red. My stomach turned. That wasn't cleaning water. Before I could drag Darius back, she moved. Not rushed, not lunging, but fast enough that in 2 seconds she was standing just 10 feet from us, her shoes silent on the tile. Up close, her uniform was spotless, perfectly pressed. Not a wrinkle, not a speck of dust, like she had stepped out of another century. And her gloves, they were stained pink at the fingertips. She reached for me with the rag. I bolted, shoving Darius. We sprinted down a side hall, breath echoing, beams of light bouncing across graffiti and broken plaster. The squeak of her cart followed, steady, patient, never hurried. We ducked into a treatment room, slammed the door, pressed our backs against it. My chest heaved, lungs clawing for air. Darius whispered, "Man, she's good. This has to be a squatter pulling a prank." But when I looked at his cheek under the flashlight, my blood went cold. His skin was pale and shiny where she'd touched him with the rag, like plastic, like a doll's cheek. The pores were gone. The hair was gone. just smooth, unnatural surface. "Darius," I stammered. "Your face." He reached up, touched it, and flinched. "What the hell?" We didn't wait. We ran again, deeper into the hospital. The disinfectant smell grew stronger, stinging our throats. My flashlight caught more carvings in the walls, frantic scratches left by patients decades ago. She polishes, she strips, not dust, not dirt, US. Every door we passed rattled as though someone was inside, trying to claw out. By the time we reached the old surgical wing, Darius was panting, clutching his cheek. The smooth patch had spread, crawling toward his eye. He muttered, "It burns. It's tight. I can't." Then he screamed, because the flesh at the corner of his mouth cracked, not bleeding, but splitting like clay, revealing more of that porcelain surface underneath. I dragged him into an operating theater, shoved a table in front of the door. We collapsed in the corner, both shaking. My flashlight beam trembled over the old patient bed still strapped with leather restraints. That's when we heard the squeak again. Not outside. Inside. From the shadows at the far wall, the maid emerged, rag in hand, cart at her side. She hadn't used the door. She hadn't needed to. Her pale eyes locked on us. She raised the rag, and for the first time, I realized what she was cleaning. Not rooms, not walls, not beds. People. Darius clawed at his cheek, skin stretching tight under his nails. The smooth patch spread like wax melting over him, swallowing freckles, swallowing pores. His screams bounced off the tiled walls, raw and panicked. I tried to pull him up. "We have to move. Now." But the maid was already gliding closer, rag dripping crimson into her basin. She wasn't rushing. She never rushed. Every step was calm, certain, patient, like she knew there was no way out. I dragged Darius toward the back of the operating theater. His body was heavy, his legs stumbling like he'd lost control. The leather straps on the surgical bed brushed against my arm, and I realized with a jolt of horror that they weren't dusty like everything else. They were clean, polished, like someone had been using them recently. The squeak of her cart echoed behind us. "Stay away!" I screamed, fumbling for something, anything to defend myself. My hand landed on a rusted scalpel tray. I hurled it across the floor. It clattered against her cart, but she didn't flinch. She only lifted the rag higher. "Unclean," she whispered. Darius's legs buckled. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, his face half gone now, smooth and featureless like a mannequin melting under heat. One of his eyes was still visible, wide with terror, the other sealed under a glossy white shell. He wheezed, "Help me!" The maid reached out, pressed her rag gently to his arm. The skin beneath dissolved into blank porcelain. Darius convulsed. His scream gurgled, then cut off as his mouth sealed shut. His chest heaved, but no sound came out. I pulled at him, desperate, but he was slipping from my grip, his flesh stiffening, his limbs freezing. Within seconds, he was no longer Darius. He was a mannequin, smooth, expressionless, frozen in a half-kneeling posture, his camera lying useless on the floor beside him. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The maid didn't acknowledge me. She bent over Darius's new form, running her cloth lovingly across his cheek until it gleamed. Then she whispered, "Clean." My hands shook. I bolted. The hallways twisted like a maze, every corner identical. Peeling paint, rusted gurneys, broken windows. The smell of disinfectant burned stronger with every step, clinging to my skin, filling my lungs. I turned left, then right, desperate for an exit. But the hospital seemed alive, rearranging itself. No matter which hall I chose, the squeak of her cart followed. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes echoing from all directions. Finally, I shoved open a door and staggered into a wide ward. Dozens of beds lined the room, each one occupied. I froze. They weren't patients. They were mannequins. Dozens of them, lying under white sheets, hands folded neatly on their chests. Their faces were blank, smooth, gleaming under the faint moonlight leaking through the broken windows, each one polished to perfection. And in the farthest bed, my breath caught. It was me. I saw my own body lying there, dressed in a hospital gown, skin already half smooth. My reflection, my features disappearing into that same porcelain mask. My legs gave out. I stumbled to the floor, gasping, shaking my head. No, this isn't real, it can't be. The maid emerged from the shadows, rag dripping. Her eyes locked on me, steady and calm. She raised her hand, pointing to the empty bed beside my double. "Dirty," she whispered. I scrambled back, my palms scraping against tile. But behind me, something cold and stiff caught my shoulder. I spun and saw another mannequin sitting upright in the nearest bed, its head turning slowly, blank face tilting as if watching me. One by one, the others began to move. Heads creaked on stiff necks. Limbs shifted under sheets. Dozens of polished figures sitting up in unison, all turning toward me. My chest seized with terror. I lunged toward the exit, but the maid was already there, blocking the doorway, cart at her side. She didn't lift the rag. She didn't need to. I felt it before she touched me, my skin tightening, my arms stiffening, my voice catching in my throat. I looked down and saw smooth patches spreading across my wrists, my hands, white, glossy, erasing me inch by inch. I clawed at my arm, ripping at the porcelain layer, but it didn't break. It only spread faster. My breath came shallow, ragged. My legs locked in place. The maid glided closer, eyes never blinking. She leaned down, pressing the rag against my cheek with gentle precision. The burn was immediate, searing, like acid under my skin. My vision blurred. The last thing I heard was her whisper, soft and satisfied. Clean. I don't remember getting out of Briarhurst. When I opened my eyes, I was in my apartment. My lights on, my sheets tucked perfectly tight around me. For one moment, I thought it was a nightmare. But then I looked at my hands. Smooth, glossy, white. And in the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows, stood a cart. The rag dripped onto the floor. The squeak of wheels rolled closer. When my father died, our house in Ashbury felt like it was collapsing in on itself. My mother, Sarah, stopped cooking. My brother, Malric, wandered the halls like a ghost, always drunk. I was 21, trying to hold the pieces together, but everything was brittle, cracked, about to break. That's when the maid arrived. Her name was Elira. She came from some referral service my aunt swore by, though I never saw a contract. She just appeared one morning in a pressed black uniform, hair bound in a tight braid, voice quiet but firm. "I will bring this house back into order," she said. We didn't question it. We were too tired to. At first, she was everything my mother wanted. The floors gleamed, the dishes sparkled, the laundry smelled of lavender. Elira moved silently from room to room, dusting shelves, aligning picture frames, pressing wrinkles from curtains. Her touch made the house look alive again. But it wasn't just the house she touched. One night I came downstairs and found her at the family portrait above the fireplace. My father's face, once lined with warmth, was pale under her rag. She was wiping at it, slow, circular strokes, humming under her breath. "Don't," I said. She froze, rag poised, then turned her head. Her eyes were pale gray, so light they almost glowed. Dust settles in photographs. Dust is memory. Too much of it clutters the mind. The next morning I looked at that portrait again. My father's face was still there, but softer, blurred around the edges, like the photo had faded overnight. When I told my mother, she only frowned. That picture was old, colors fade. But I knew what I saw. As weeks passed, I noticed smaller things. Malric's trophies vanished from his shelves. Old notebooks from my father's law practice disappeared from the study. Even the worn quilt my grandmother stitched was gone, replaced by a plain white blanket folded with clinical precision. I confronted Alira. "Where are our things?" "They were clutter," she said simply. "Clutter clouds the heart. I am making you clean." Her voice wasn't threatening. If anything, it was soothing. But it sank into me like a knife. At dinner, my mother no longer mentioned my father's name. When I brought him up, she tilted her head in confusion, as if searching for a memory she couldn't quite reach. "Stop," I snapped once, slamming my fork down. "You know who I'm talking about." She stared at me blankly. "I don't." I looked at Malric for help, but he only shrugged, glassy-eyed. "You're always dramatic." But he'd changed too. I remembered nights when he'd sing our father's favorite folk songs until he slurred the words. Now he didn't hum a note. The music had been scrubbed from him. By late autumn, the house was spotless. Too spotless. Rooms no longer looked lived in. They looked staged, like museum exhibits. Beds tucked so tightly you could bounce a coin. Tables gleamed without fingerprints. Closets held only neutral clothes, folded into perfect squares. One night, I went searching for my father's journals. They were always stacked in the study, full of his handwriting, his voice. I tore through every drawer, every shelf. Nothing. Not even dust marks where they used to sit. Elira stood in the doorway, hands folded neatly. "They were worn," she said. "I cleaned them away." My throat tightened. "You had no right." Her face was calm, expressionless. "A family must be spotless. Yours was stained with grief. I am correcting it." I shoved past her, heart pounding, desperate to cling to something real. In my room, I pulled out an old photo album. Childhood pictures. Me with missing teeth, Malric holding a baseball bat, my father lifting us on his shoulders. Proof that we had lived, loved. But when I opened the album, the pictures were blank. Not torn, not faded. Blank. White rectangles where our faces had been. I dropped it, choking back a sob. The next morning, I tried to shake my mother awake. "It's me," I whispered. "Your son. You remember me, right?" She blinked up at me, confused. "My son." Her lips trembled and she looked away. "I'm sorry. I don't know." Something inside me cracked. I stormed into the kitchen where Elira was polishing silverware. "What are you doing to us?" I screamed. "What did you take from her? From him?" She looked up, serene, unbothered. "Messy love, painful love. I am scrubbing it away. Families shouldn't be heavy with memory. They should be light, clean. You're erasing us." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Exactly." That night, I sat in the dark, clinging to the last remnants I had. The sound of my father's laugh, the way my mother's perfume lingered in the halls, the scratch of Malric's guitar. But even those began to blur. I tried to hum my father's folk songs, but the melody slipped away. I tried to picture his face, but it fuzzed at the edges. And when I crept downstairs, I saw Elira at the portrait again. This time she wasn't wiping my father's face. She was wiping mine. The outline of my jaw had already faded. I couldn't move. I stood there in the dark, staring at the family portrait as Elira's rag circled my face, wiping me into nothing. My outline was already faint, my smile blurred, my eyes pale gray smudges. "Stop!" I shouted, rushing forward. I grabbed the frame, yanked it off the wall. The glass shattered across the tile. Elira didn't flinch. She bent down, picked up a shard, and held it to the light. My reflection wavered in the broken glass. Hazy, incomplete, like even the mirror was forgetting me. "Why?" I demanded. My throat was tight, my eyes stung. "Why us? Why my family?" Her voice was calm, almost tender. "Because you were dirty, cluttered with grief, regret, love, all stains. I was called here to make you clean. I never called you. You didn't need to." She touched her chest with one gloved hand. Houses call me when they ache. I arrive where there is too much to scrub. I stumbled back, glass crunching underfoot. Upstairs, I heard my brother's door creak. Malric shuffled out, eyes hollow, moving like a man half asleep. He looked at me, brow furrowing as though he recognized me for a moment. Then his face slackened. "Who are you?" I nearly collapsed. "It's me," I pleaded. "Mal, it's your brother." But he only rubbed his temples and turned away, muttering, "Strangers shouldn't be here." Elira's rag brushed the frame again. Another piece of me vanished. Over the next days, it worsened. My mother no longer looked at me. She passed me in the hallway like I was air. Malric sat on the porch for hours, staring into nothing, strumming his guitar without strings. Every photo, every book, every object tied to us was spotless, sterile, soulless. The house gleamed, but it felt less like home and more like a mausoleum. I clung to scraps. I whispered my father's name over and over at night so I wouldn't forget it. I etched my own name into the underside of my desk, carving until my hands bled. "I am Riven." I repeated it like a prayer. But each morning the carving was gone, the wood smooth, polished. And in the corner of my room, folded perfectly on the chair, lay one of Elira's rags. I decided to leave. Pack a bag, walk into town, never come back. But when I stepped outside, the streets were wrong. Too quiet. The houses across the way had no lights, no curtains, no cars. Just empty shells, windows gleaming blank like eyes with cataracts. And the people. There were none. I walked block after block, but it was like the world had been scrubbed away, leaving only silence. When I turned back, Elira was standing in the yard, hands folded, apron pristine. "You cannot leave," she said. "You are part of the mess. Until you are clean, you belong here." My knees nearly gave out. "Please, please don't take the rest of me." She tilted her head, studying me. For the first time, her voice softened, almost kind. "It will not hurt. It never hurts. It is peace. To be spotless. To be forgotten." That night, I dreamed of my father. He was sitting at the dining table, laughing the way he used to. But when I tried to run to him, his face blurred, melting into white. His laugh stretched thin, hollow, until it faded into silence. I woke up screaming, and Elira was sitting at the foot of my bed. She had the photo album in her lap, the one I'd hidden under my mattress. She turned the pages slowly, her rag brushing across them. With each wipe, the images dissolved. One by one, my life erased. I lunged at her, grabbed the book, but the pages were blank in my hands. She looked at me, her gray eyes steady. "You are almost ready." The next morning, my reflection in the bathroom mirror was faint, my features dull, fading like a photograph left in sunlight. My voice cracked when I tried to say my own name. Panic clawed through me. I ran through the house, tearing at walls, opening drawers, desperate for anything that proved we had been a family. A note in my father's handwriting. A toy Malric once broke. My mother's wedding ring. Nothing. Only spotless surfaces. And then I saw it. Above the fireplace. The portrait. The frame was back on the wall. Clean. Perfect. My father's face was gone. My mother's gone. Malric's too. And mine. Mine was nearly erased. Only the faintest ghost of eyes remained. I fell to my knees, sobbing. "Please," I begged, "don't take me away. Don't make me nothing." Elira stepped beside me. She pressed her rag to my cheek. It was cool, soft. The smell of lavender filled my lungs. "Families forget," she whispered, "but houses stay clean." The last thing I remember is her wiping, until the world was white. And then nothing. They say the house in Ashbury is the cleanest in the county now. Realtors brag about its pristine condition, how it looks untouched despite its age. But if you look at the portrait above the fireplace, you'll see nothing. No faces, no names, only a spotless frame, gleaming under the light.